Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Lexi Gee, a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. Gee.
Black Like Me.
Hey, good people. Welcome to another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Lexi Gee. And I am excited and pissed about today's episode. I have one of my favorite people on the planet in the studio with me again today, none other than Catherine Alexis Victorious Gee, my only child, our only daughter, our only child. And she's in the studio, and we're going to be talking about a number of things. If you've been keeping up with recent episodes, you know that we've been talking about white fragility. I recently spoke with Dr. Robin DiAngelo about white fragility, particularly how it plays out in white women. We've also been talking about the lack of intersectionality within white women and how, as they've come into power, have not necessarily thought about women of color and how they work together for common good. And we've also been talking a lot about how black people need to navigate white space. Well, today's discussion is about a convergence of those three topics. And so, listen, if you're a white woman, if you know a white woman, if you love a white woman, tell her to listen up, because we're about to talk. And we're not trying to put people down. We're just trying to bring some real discussion to the table. Because often when we're talking about race relations, we really come at white men. We talk about, taking on the man, sticking it to the man. But the man has a counterpart that we don't talk about a lot, and that's the white woman. And we need to talk about this because if she's going to be an ally and a partner in this work, there's some things that she's got to really, really understand. And so, Lexi, honey, welcome to Black Like Me with Dr. Daddy, Lexi Gee. How are you doing today, honey?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here.
Good. I'm glad you are. And I know it's difficult to put your business out in the street, but you're in this public family. And so I'm either preaching about you or talking about you or writing about you. But today really is about your story. It's not you coming in commenting on something I've experienced. But recently there's some things that you've experienced in the classroom at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where you just graduated with a major in English and also a certificate in Italian. And we just want to talk about your incident and some things you experienced. Because one, I think so many black students and students of color experience it. And I also think that it happens in places where it's witnessed by white faculty. And they either don't do anything or don't do enough to really address these issues. And I think because the whole nation, the world is talking about diversity and inclusion and how we do a better job of this. I think what we're going to be talking about today is it's going to be a lot of food for thought. And then we have a visiting academician in the studio today to help us to process this, because we want to get a white academician's perspective. And we also have Dr. Karen Reese, who's in the studio today, and she received her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in physiology. She's a researcher, community organizer. She's an ally of mine. She's written papers. She's authored papers. She's a thought leader, and she's going to help us to just really talk about how white women can aid students of color on campus. And she's filling in because really you were recently published in a magazine called Transformations, the Journal of Inclusive Scholarship and Pedagogy. But you're supposed to appear here today with your professor. You wrote a piece together that was called A Collective Dialogue on the N-Word in the University Classroom. It's listed in this magazine under the heading Teaching Failures. And we talked about this months ago that your professor was going to come in and talk about this fantastic article that you just wrote with her, and she bailed. She said that it's one thing to write about subjects of race, but it's daunting to be on a podcast where she can't really edit her work, and she's a professor, so she speaks publicly for a living. But it's an opportunity to join you in this whole discussion. So we're going to light it up today on Black Like Me. But my colleague Karen is sitting in just to bring a perspective of a white female who's a researcher in a major research institution, and the opportunity that this could have offered her, and what it could have done for you in your career and your growth, but also just for your emotional well-being as a graduate of this institution and as a person who's going to start grad school at this institution this fall as well. So Dr. Reese, thank you for filling in today.
Thanks for having me.
So Lexi, so just breathe. We're not going to say the professor's name, but we are going to link the article in this. All right, we are going to link the article. We're going to talk about it today because here's what's going on. Here's what's going on. And we're going to have you set the situation up. But something happened in the classroom, and I'm going to ask you in a minute to take us there. You checked in with your professor about it. So anyway, things progressed. The professor afterwards, after this was addressed, we'll talk about whether you thought it was done satisfactorily, was asked to co-author an article with you for a scholarly journal, which she did. And you all worked on and wrote. I can remember being on vacation a year ago, Lexi. We were out of the country. And I got up one day and you were stressing on, you should have been at the beach. You should have been, hanging out playing ping pong at the gym, doing something. You're working on an article. I said, what are you doing? And you said, well, I'm working on this article because they want some edits. And, she's communicating with you about what you should add and what you should do. So she's like all in your world, but because of the experience you had in her classroom, because she wanted to show you that, or her role was to help you as a student of color to feel comfortable in her classroom. And so you wrote this article with her. You're in her scholarly world. This is not where you live. You don't live in Transformations, the Journal of Inclusive Scholarship and Pedagogy. That's not where you live. I mean, you live in Harry Potter and what's the girl with the red head with the freckles?
Anne of Green Gables.
Yeah, like you live in that kind of stuff. And I'm sure you're an English
I'm
major.
surprised you didn't say Marvel.
Or Marvel. You live in these where this is not your world. So you all down in here sweating it out. And we're celebrating you and our wedding anniversary. So we have family and friends down there. And you're working on this article. But then when it's time for her to step into your world, because as a university student, you're always in her world. It's just, it's daunting. It's daunting. So we're going to get into that. I'm going to try to be fair. So Lexi, how do we get to this article? What happened in the class? Just a brief summary. You're in a class. What takes place in this class on campus as an upper level English major?
Yeah. So it was a course that was based in like American women writers. So we were reading all these books by American women. And I was really excited about this class because a surprising amount of the books were by Black women or by other women of color.
Sure.
And it was a really discussion-based course. So we would have either like small group discussions or like full class discussions. But we were reading The Street by Ann Petrie, and the professor she'd like picked a section that we were going to discuss and asked a student to read it out loud. And in doing so, she said something along the lines of like, this passage has like a racial slur in it, so like if you don't want to say it, like don't say it, or something along those lines. And it had the N-word in the passage about maybe 5 or 6 times.
Was it a white student?
Yeah, it was a white student that offered to read it.
And how many Black students were in the class?
Me. It was just me.
It's just okay. So she asked the student, if you don't feel comfortable saying this word, it's okay, but didn't ask if you were uncomfortable hearing it to say something. Okay.
Exactly. And so the student read the passage and didn't censor herself in any way, didn't skip the word, didn't just say the N-word.
She said it like she'd been wanting to say it.
Like hard R said it.
Hard R. Not even soft A, hard R. I've never heard that. Dang. Oh my.
And yeah, and so I don't really know how to describe that experience because it was honestly like an out of body experience.
Sure.
Like I just kind of like froze.
Sure.
In the moment, but I became friends with another person in that class who was a person of color.
Sure.
And she turned to the professor and said like there's no reason for anybody to use that word who's not Black, especially in this context where 99% of this classroom is white. Like there was no benefit to you allowing her to say that. Like
your classmate
my
said
classmate
that
said that to the professor in class. Because like I was just, I don't know, I was not capable of saying anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so the professor said something like, yeah, like I understand, I hear what you're saying. and just kind of like moved on
Sure.
with the lesson. It was just kind of like, okay, let's talk about character analysis or whatever.
She missed the lesson.
And so, yeah, I left the classroom and was just like in a state of shock. Like I was like, what just happened? Like, did any of that actually just happen? Like, where do I go with this?
And you called me. I was in Michigan. I remember I was at a conference, and it's not like you to call me during the day. So I saw that it was you, and I said, my daughter's calling me. And I stepped outside. I remember it was raining. I was standing under, under some awning or something, and you were crying.
Yeah. I actually called Mom first and just kind of explained what was going on. And I was like, I'm so angry. And like, I have no, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, how am I supposed to go back into that classroom tomorrow? Like,
Right.
how am I supposed to ever feel like that's a space where I wanted, or like a space where I can comfortably work? Like, how can I feel like this is a safe space for me to exist? And Mom was like, well, you need to say something. Like, you need to tell the professor that wasn't okay. Like, you have to step up and say something. And I was like, I don't want to have to do that. Like, I was like, I'm here to get an education, not educate people. Like, that's not what I'm here to be doing. And she was like, well, if you don't say anything, then like the next student, like the next Black student who takes this class is like privy to the exact same experience.
So Lexi, just tell me a moment about the pressure that's on a young African-American student, young African-American scholar, who has that experience but has to educate her professor who grades your work in your major, and you know that you're wanting to go to grad school. So all that pressure's on you. Talk to me about the pressure that's on African-American students, people of color, and the pressure specifically of having to educate when you're in an environment where you need to be educated.
Yeah, I think that was one of the things that made me the angriest about the entire situation, because it was one thing to have that experience that was extremely isolating and extremely traumatic even. Like, I never felt like I could go back into that classroom and feel like, and not feel, I mean, I don't want to say that I wasn't always extremely aware of being the only Black student in the classroom, because I obviously was, but it's different when there's this entire fiasco that happens entirely around using language that's like traumatic for Black people.
Right.
That adds a whole other layer to the discomfort that comes with that. So like, it wasn't even only that, but then to have to like almost dissect that traumatic experience and then explain it to somebody who not only is in a position of power over me, but then to have to like make this traumatic experience palatable so that she can learn from it.
Wow. I'm just pausing to think about that, because that's too much chess to play in your head.
And then to finish like a 5-page paper.
Then finish
the
a
next
5
day.
yeah, right. To go home and finish that. That's too much, because you're absolutely right. You've got to make it palatable, because if you don't, you're worried that she's going to be fearful that you have accused her of being racist, or others.
Exactly.
And I've had that situation where I've gone to a manager after having experience at a grocery store once. And I remember the manager saying, first of all, let me just say, and this is a major grocery store, none of my staff members are racist. You got people doing drugs in the bathroom at this store. You know, the checker on aisle 5 smelled like weed. You don't know what these people do. And so there's this defensiveness, because there are really no racists in Madison, Wisconsin, at the University of Wisconsin. They're all in the South someplace. So you're having to go through all of this about how to communicate this to her, which is very daunting, which is ironic that it's hard for her to talk about race, and there's no loss of power here. You have to go swim upstream to think about how to do this so that you don't piss off a professor with something that was very traumatic to you. That's too much experience. That's too much pain for us. That's too much work and pressure for anyone, but particularly a student of color on a campus that is extremely isolated, and which is what makes navigating these spaces so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember talking with you, and I said, well, Lexi, welcome to the struggle. And that was painful to say. I have to say, parents do not like to see their children in distress. And you are clearly upset. And you're not a crier.
Right.
I mean, you've always been a tough kid. And I'm not saying you don't cry, but you just don't do it publicly. And I know what you and I have in common is that when we are really mad, when we are pissed, we cry. So then I get mad that I'm crying because it looks like I'm
Exactly.
sad. So I'm mad that I'm crying because it's made me, so I knew where you were. But if I didn't say welcome to the struggle, because for me, that was a disruptive moment for you. You had always grown up being one of maybe 2 or 3 black students in your class always. So you wait until your senior year in college to hear this word being used. I mean, like, when have people read literature out loud? I think like 4th grade is the last time we did that, I don't know. And so you're having this experience. And I said, welcome to the struggle. And I said, honey, you have to speak up because you're upset that none of the white students spoke up.
Right.
And I said, honey, they probably were looking to you for direction. And I didn't want you to be in a position where you felt you had no voice. So I wasn't really trying to push you towards confrontation for the sake of confrontation. I wanted you to know that you had a voice and don't let this experience silence it. And so you went back and, you had some discussion. We don't have to get into that, but some discussion. But it actually made things worse because didn't you say the student had read it? Did she use some example? Anyway, but she justified it. Right. And why she was using it. So you were thinking people were going to say, I'm sorry, we didn't mean to offend anyone. Some of the white students doubled down, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The student who read it just said something along the lines of like, oh, I didn't hear what the professor said, so I thought I had to read it, or like something where it was like, really? You thought you had to read it? Like,
nobody tells white people what to do. What you mean? I had no choice. We all know nobody tells white people what to do. And so if people start making excuses and stuff like that, the teacher kind of lost him.
It was a lot.
So then so you addressed it. She wrote some emails to the class. So she did attempt to. She did try to address it. But was it ever the same for you sitting in that class again?
No. Which was more frustrating than I had anticipated because I'd really enjoyed that class. And it's really frustrating when you genuinely enjoy content you're learning, but then you can't fully exist in that. Like, I never felt like I was ever truly present because I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Sure. So then you finished that semester, you crushed it, you got an A out of the class, which is the best revenge. But a little bit later, the professor wrote you and said...
Yeah, I got an email from the professor where she said, like, I didn't think it was appropriate to send this at the time, but, like, one of the higher-ups in the department thought it would be really good if we, like, publish something that was like a description of what happened in the classroom, or like if we tried to somehow get some sort of positive some sort of positive ending.
And this was not for the university. This was not for for their newspaper. This was not for the Badger Herald
no,
or the Daily Cardinal.
No, it was like academic journal, like peer reviewed, like formal publication.
We're going to be bringing our colleague, Dr. Reese, in just a little bit. But as an undergrad in African-American history and econ, I was never asked to co-author a scholarly journal. Dr. Reese, were you asked as an undergrad?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so this is major, Lexi. This is major. So you're asked to do this by one of the higher-ups. But your professor's black friends were challenging her because they were saying, what did they say to her? They said, wow, you're sounding kind of like the hero.
Yeah. Yeah, she said that that she was definitely being challenged by people in her life that felt very strangely about the choice to publish an article about what happened.
And was it the way she wrote it? Was it the way she
Yeah,
talked about it?
yeah, like-
so it wasn't even just a choice. So tell me a little bit more about this. They were really challenging
Yeah.
what she was saying,
Yeah,
right?
in the writing process, I know she'd said that she'd had some people in her life that were like, the way that you're writing about that is very like white savior-y. And I know that the editors also had a lot of issues.
The editors of the journal?
Of the journal, yeah, because they would like review it and then would send it back for us to make some like additional changes that they thought would read better by the time of publication. And they didn't like send us our separate parts. They just like sent it back as a whole. And yeah, there was a lot of them challenging her on what she wrote,
Really?
which I hadn't expected. I'd expected like put a comma here, not like this is BS.
Oh, that's the kind of...
Yeah, like it was like you need to reword this because this doesn't sound the way you think it sounds.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. And so I know that, could you let me read it? There was one part where you asked, well, why do white people want to say the N-word so badly? And she sent you an email and she said, Lexi, that's not fair. Do you remember that part?
Yeah. The first time we'd had that discussion was actually face-to-face, where there was a section of the article where we were talking about putting like a Q&A area.
Sure.
And yeah, one of my questions was like, why do white people want to say the N-word so much? And she was like, I don't think white people want to say the N-word.
And she told you that was unfair to say that.
Yeah.
Because she said she didn't give the student a choice.
Yeah, or something like that, yeah. But yeah, she was like, like, no. And I was like, like, I don't know, it was very, like, I was like, how can you tell me that white, like, I don't know, it was very, I don't know what the word is. It was very weird to be like, this is something that I see happening a lot.
Right.
And then to have somebody be like, no, that doesn't, like.
So she's telling you white students don't want to say the word.
Right. Where it's, and, like, I just can't like comprehend how somebody can say like, this is my lived experience. This is something that I've seen happen, and just be like, no, it's not.
The students don't want to do that. They feel the same way. And so, we have these discussions on Black Like Me because we're wanting to expose people to the reality of what really, really happens. I mean, you're a good student. You were offered funding for 5 years for a PhD in Italian. You're offered full funding for a master's in library. I'm bragging on my daughter. I mean, you're offered a free ride. The University of Wisconsin is basically saying, if you want a master's, come, no cost. You want a PhD, come, no cost. But yet you have these experiences that make you think, do I have what it takes, or do I want to do this on this campus? And this is why it's so difficult. When you talk to many folks about their experiences with racial run-ins, many Black students and students of color say that their first experiences were with teachers. And so we're trying to figure out how to make campus more livable, more accessible. Let's have Black space. Let's have Latino space. Let's have LGBTQ space. They're not understanding that in classrooms and advisory space, teachers and folks are saying things like, to tell you that white students don't want to say the N-word. Why can't we say it? Rappers say it.
Exactly.
Everyone knows that there are white people that want to say the word, but for her to act like she doesn't even understand that, it's not just short-sighted, but it's cruel because it's telling you to rewrite your history and to rewire your understanding. So the article came out. It's good. It costs like $19 to download it. You said, Lexi, it's a journal. Like you can find it in a like on
JSTOR.
On JSTOR, because you use that just for when you're researching for other things.
Yeah, it was really weird because I like the article, like the people who run the article like sent out an email and was like, hey, like the article's up, and like sent the link. And it was a JSTOR link, and I was like, "Oh, that's weird." Like
I know that.
Like I like look up stuff for essays on here, and like I'm on here.
I'm in here.
It's really weird.
Okay, so your article comes out. We're proud, but while you're writing the article, Tyler, my podcast manager, wrote you and your professor and said, "Hey, when this is out, Dr. G would like to have you both in the studio to talk about the experience." You both wrote back and said, "Yeah, we want to do it." So now when we're ready to schedule, your professor pulls out. She doesn't want to talk about it. It's too daunting to talk about race, but she's not realizing how daunting it is for you to take on a course, a whole classroom, and your professor about these kinds of issues. So she's not showing up here. And so I just want to bring in my colleague, Dr. Karen Reese, for just a moment. You're an academician. You've written papers. Don't you write papers in order to come and talk about your research?
Absolutely. You'd be hard pressed to find an academic who does not want to talk about their research and their publications.
If this were CNN, would she show up?
Absolutely, or NPR,
Exactly.
anything.
Exactly. So Karen, I'm not asking you to think and speak for all white women who are in academia, but I need you to speak for all white women in academia. What is this? What's going on here, Karen? I've asked you here, Dr. Reese, because I don't, of course, I'm pissed because I feel like my daughter was used. I feel like when you want to write an article, and who's going to listen to a white academic talk about, oops, I did it again. I made a mistake about using the N-word. So you bring in a really good black student and you write this with her. They were working on this a year ago, and I'm not exaggerating. Lexi was editing in Mexico in our hotel room. I had to make her stop and say, you tell the professor you will deal with this when you get back, but you're with your family right now. And so when she comes and helps to either affirm the experience or helps to record something so that other black students can listen and say, wow, there are faculty who get this. She's writing about pedagogical failures. Is that a word? Pedagogical? Pedagogical. Thank you. You always tell me those words. Pedagogical failure. Leave that in, Eli. Pedagogical. Did I say that right that time?
Yes.
Failures. Wasn't that just a pedagogical failure to not come in here and talk about what she learned from the experience?
Yeah. So, in research, and especially academic research, you're really focusing in on a niche area. So the general public doesn't really care. Honestly, to be perfectly honest, doesn't really care. The purpose of academic research and an academic profession is to dig into a specific area and tease it out and understand it more.
Sure.
So when someone who's not from your field asks you to talk about it, it's like, I don't know, it's just opening up a whole new world. Like, oh, someone cares. I can tell them what I know because that subject matter is really, really important to you because you put your life into it. Your whole life is around that. So it's given the subject matter, though, it's not surprising to me that this is the decision that she made. So
that's interesting. So not surprising to you.
No, we've seen, especially over the past few years, so much scrutiny for faculty who have dared to speak up about racism issues on campus. We had the professor that had a class called The Problem of Whiteness a few years ago, and the university was challenged over even accreditation. And what is that how you say that, accreditation?
Yeah, you got that one right, yes. I'm going to catch you saying a word wrong.
Please do. Challenged to that level. That's the level of scrutiny over a thought exercise for students. And at a university, that's kind of the whole point of liberal arts classes, is thought exercise, dig deep into this and figure out, what is the meaning, what are the theories, and how do you proceed? So given the scrutiny, I could see her fear of saying the wrong thing, that being highlighted and then, blown up in the public eye.
Sure.
That's a legitimate fear. But through this whole process, one would hope that if you went to the level to write an article recognizing the failure, that you would be trying to move forward to completely understand what that failure means and its impact. And as an academic, that means digging deeper into the theories, into the whys, into how not to do it again and how to classify it and characterize it, which would mean coming on a podcast and talking about it in detail. And I don't know this woman personally at all, never met her. But as a white woman academician, I'm very familiar with a lot of the things that I heard. So, sharing an office with your mom, Lexi, and I was hearing this as it was unfolding. I was in the office the day that you called her to tell her about this. And so as I was hearing pieces of the story about, what should you do? Should you say something? Should you write a letter? I think I even read the letter before it went out. And so I was seeing like very specific behaviors and responses that were very characteristic of an academic, but also a white woman being challenged about her racial views and her racism. And so I tried to give little pieces of advice when they're pressuring you about deadlines, like, oh, no, that's not. Because you also have the professor-student dynamic. And so you were saying the amazingness of being invited to co-author a paper with the professor when you're an undergrad. That's a little shot to the ego too. It's like, I'm your professor. I know it all. You are a little baby that's just coming up.
You're not even a grad student.
Right. And so.
And they gave Lexi top billing in the article. When the article came out, it said Lexi Gee, and I'm not going to say the professor's name, but Lexi's name was first.
Yep. And I was like, she has to be first author on this. Absolutely. But that puts you on a level playing field in this subject, which makes it not only so you're dealing with
break down that white woman shit. Break that shit down.
The professor-student dynamic, the shot to the ego about you now being equal with an undergrad, and then you have someone who's now being challenged about her racism directly in her face by a Black student, and then you have all the thoughts and fears and things that come up that she hasn't dealt with about her own racism that are coming into play. And she's being forced to deal with all of those things at once. So that showed certain edits in the paper, the way the paper was written, just kind of outlines where she is in her journey of understanding racism and her place in it.
That's helpful. Karen, that's helpful.
So just to the question about why do white people want to say the N-word, if you haven't thought about this, if you're not really fully aware of your own racism, you probably, I don't know, she probably really didn't think at that moment that people want to say it. Because that thought is buried so deeply within her. We bury because we're taught from a young age, don't see color. If you see color, you're a racist, you're a bad person. We're all the same on the inside. We all bleed red, But we obviously see differences because we're human beings with eyeballs and we notice things. And so when we see that, we spend a lot of time like, well, I'm noticing this, but I'm not a bad person. I'm not, I'm not a racist. So I'm going to push that down and pretend it doesn't exist. So when you open it up and something like this, it just comes with all kinds of defensiveness and personal feelings in ways that you want to flex on the situation to make yourself right.
Sure.
Yeah. And hence the students, doubling down on why it was okay because they had to justify to themselves why they weren't racist, even though they are, because all white people are racist.
Oof, dang, I got to breathe for just a minute. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this segment of Black Like Me. I want to take this moment to tell you about something new that we're adding to the Black Like Me experience. I've added a Patreon page. Yeah, that's right. Patreon.com/BlackLikeMe. It allows me to really connect with the listeners more. As I've been traveling the last few months, I am meeting so many strangers who are telling me how this show is having an impact not only on their personal perspectives and lives, but their professional lives. And that means a lot to me. So we've created a number of tiers, and I think you'll like this. Cream of wheat, grits with salt level, grits with sugar, grits with shrimp and cheese, a black icebreaker level. They give folks a variety of choices depending upon what you can afford. But what it allows me to do, depending on the level, where I will shout out your name on one of the shows. Another level allows us to have quarterly interactions on a private Facebook page. And there's another level that allows me to FaceTime with listeners individually to talk to you about what's going on in my world and in the studio and what's coming up. It's really exciting. We've been able to offer a great show to you for the past 2 years, and we want to maintain that level of professionalism while adding a few new things that I can't quite tell you yet. But please go to patreon.com/BlackLikeMe and help us take this show to another level. But Dr. Reese, you bring something to mind. You're talking about the fact that being asked to co-author something with a student, an undergraduate student, grad student, we're working together because, maybe they're going to help you with your research, but an undergraduate student. But Lexi, you didn't even feel like that was a great thing. Like we were saying, Lexi, you're going to be in a scholarly journal. I mean, your mom and I have worked for the university. I do faculty, visiting faculty work. So I know how important this is. But for you, it was a regurgitation of a horrible experience. So it wasn't like you wanted to write about your favorite character or styles of writing or whatever it was. You're writing about a process that was still unresolved. And the professor is trying is trying to trying to challenge your questions. Mm-hmm. So did you realize that this was a big opportunity, or did it feel like that it was the wonderful opportunity that it was, that as an undergrad you're being able to ask that? Did you feel that you could celebrate that at any point of the time? Did it seem like a big thing?
I don't think it really felt like a big thing, honestly, until they emailed me the PDF. Then I was like, oh, this is real. Like, this is, like, people have to pay for this.
Right.
But yeah, I think in part, I don't think I really understood the full implications of what writing in an academic journal really meant. Because I was like, I don't even really know what that means, you know? Like,
you're an English major, right? Yeah, I just wrote a 20-page paper. This is nothing.
Exactly.
Like, that's easy compared to. Did you realize that it was putting you in the eyes of academia on a comparable level? Like, did you understand what I guess let me ask it this way: what a blow it might have been to her ego that she had to come to you on behalf of one of the higher ups and say, we're supposed to author an article together? Did you think about what that might have meant to her?
No, I didn't think about it like that at all. I think I was too surprised that she asked me at all. Mm-hmm. Like, I was too surprised that the situation even presented itself to really think about what it really meant. Mm-hmm. So no, I guess I didn't really think about it like that. And she seemed genuine about wanting to put in the work, which encouraged me, which I think is part of what made it so frustrating in the end.
So when you get an email from her after putting all this work in, because she was very excited about it because it was going into a scholarly journal that her peers would read. I mean, part of wanting to either maintain, well, you know, I don't know if she's tenured or not, but part of the tenure process is being published. This is a big thing. It's big. So what happened to you emotionally when you got the email back? Because you had another class with her. You didn't take a class with her, but something happened with the professor. She ended up teaching the class. So I remember I asked both of you about being on the podcast while you were in the second course with her. Mm-hmm. So it's not like we just sprung it recently. So tell me, what was your response when she wrote back and said what she did about not feeling comfortable talking about this issue that you have to listen? I want you to be honest.
I don't even know where to start. At first, I think I was a little confused. But I think as I took more time to think on it, I began to get more and more frustrated. Because I was like, I spent an entire summer working on this article that forced me to continuously relive this really traumatic experience. Mm-hmm. My memories from that situation are really foggy because it was genuinely like it was a traumatic thing.
Sure.
And so the rewriting, like writing about the experience and trying to figure out how to use the right language and like all of the effort that went into writing that article over months, like meeting with her weekly, and then to have it be published, and then to feel like we're given this platform to prove that we're working, like to prove that she's trying to put in work to move in the right direction, right, to get to discuss like what she plans to do to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Right.
And then to just be like, no, it's going to be hard. I'm like, what about that wasn't hard for me? Like,
right.
Everything about that was hard for me. Like, nothing about that was easy. And so it's really frustrating to be like, okay, well, like, what are you going to do then? Like, what, you publish an article and you're woke now? Like, I don't understand. It's not even about the podcast, but it's like, I would just like to see where she's putting that effort now. Because I have no idea. And it's not even that she has to prove it, but like I just don't have any context to think that anything is changing.
How does the level of frustration to her response by being on the podcast compare to your level of frustration with her allowing a student to read that word in the classroom? Which one's more injurious?
I feel like the frustrations in some ways are really similar because it's just passiveness.
Tell me more about that.
Well, like, I think that there can be active harm, and then I think there can be passive harm.
What's the difference?
Like, active harm is you directly hurting someone.
Okay.
And passive harm is you not doing anything to stop someone being hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And what I feel like as a student of color on this campus, I feel like in a way you build up like a resistance almost to harm. Like it's almost like you walk around with the force field where it's like you just kind of try to let things bounce off you, but eventually that force field gets damaged.
Mm-hmm.
It just takes longer.
Sure.
And so I feel like in some ways to write this article, I almost allowed an opening in the force field because I was willing to work with what had hurt me, and I trusted her to cover me, basically. Like, I trusted her to do her part so that I wasn't hurting for nothing.
So what happened to that trust when she said, I feel this feels daunting for me to talk about your lived experience? What did that do to that trust?
It's not there. It got destroyed, essentially. Like, I almost felt betrayed in a way. Just because I felt like to write this article, I had to give a lot. And while I know it wasn't easy for her, there was no comparison. And I would have loved to have felt like she was willing to meet me on that. Like, I was like, if you really want to work with me, work with me.
Gotcha.
But not just on your terms. I would have loved to feel like I was met in the middle.
And how does that exacerbate the concept of non-intersectionality with white women in helping to think about the placement or displacement of women of color? I mean, what does that do to that concept? Because I mean, I'm not wanting to put words in your mouth, and I'm not wanting to say that if it were a white male, you would say, well, okay, yeah, I kind of expected that. But was there any expectation for some intersectionality that you're a woman who is a faculty member on campus? You certainly understand some of the pressures. You should get this, and to not have that happen. I'm just curious if you thought about the intersectionality or the lack thereof in this dynamic that you're now describing.
I mean, yeah, I think it would have been, I think I'd really hoped that as a professor, I mean, I think going into the class, I'd hoped for that because this is a white professor who's teaching like content that's not just about white women, which gave me a lot of hope because pretty much everything I've ever read in an academic context was about white people by white people.
Right.
So that gave me a lot of hope. So it's almost like a double blow.
Right. I mean, the irony of that.
Yeah.
So what's happening to the literature that she's reading or teaching? Because each of those women of color have experienced something similar to that. What's she missing? What are white people missing when they can read that information and then completely miss it when they have an opportunity to make that different?
Yeah. And that's what I mean by passive harm.
Yes. That's, wow.
Or not even even silence as harm.
Sure. And that's really important because many people who listen to this podcast are trying to figure out how to be allies. And, again, students of color have to wrestle with, how do I confront this? You use the words, make this palatable. Not only so that you don't make it seem like you're hurting your professor's feelings, but you're also fear of revenge, like, of that power dynamic. And so all of that makes it difficult for students of color to thrive on campuses like Wisconsin. So this is a setback, on so many levels. What do you think the journal would think about this if they knew that there was a chance to talk about this further, to show what she's learning, to show, to present something to teachers to understand how to function in this space better? What do you think their response would be?
I mean, judging by the way that they edited the article, I would hope that they would also be angry. I mean, I think just when I think about how the way the criticism worked within the edits, I think that they would also have some sort of comment that would be like, why wouldn't you take an opportunity to show what you've learned and how you're applying it?
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
What's your word or your message to white women who are teaching English courses about women of color? What do you want them to know about power they have to make campus safer for students of color, particularly women of color?
Well, obviously, don't let your white students say the N-word.
Right. Let's start
It's a good place to start. Don't actively avoid topics just because they're hard. Because if you're trying, I mean, there's no way to avoid the fact that you're talking about women of color in a context that's probably mostly white people with a few students of color. So the students of color know they're the only students of color there. You don't have to pretend like they don't know that.
Right. They looked in the mirror that morning.
Exactly. So I think like be willing to have those hard conversations. Like everybody knows that they're hard, and it's not any less hard for us at all. It's probably more hard for us. I think listen to your students of color when they state what they need. Because I know it's uncomfortable to ask for that.
Yes.
So I think feeling like I was being heard there would be really helpful, to feel like there was somebody standing with me. Because being a student of color on a predominantly white campus is very lonely. And so feeling like you have people that have your back, especially faculty, is so helpful.
Was it traumatizing coming in the studio today and talking about the loss of trust with this professor and this experience?
I don't know how to answer that, but I can't say no.
Are you worried about what she's going to think when she hears this podcast?
Yes.
Can she do anything to you?
No. But fear of backlash isn't enough to stop me from being here. So
as a student of color, you have to endure what you endure in the classroom. You have to confront the professor. You have to confront the rebuttal of the class. Then you have to be lured into a discussion or an article with faculty, be challenged on what you write, and then not be able to sit down in the same space and process it. Have you all done anything together since this article's come out?
No.
So it must be on her bucket list, or certainly on her CV. And you may not ever read it again. But I tell you what, Black Like Me is going to read it, because we're going to put that article up and they're going to know everything. So honey, I just want you to know I'm so proud of you. And although I had hoped that by the time you reached senior status in college, this would not be your battle. I had hoped that we'd live in a world where I wouldn't have to say, baby, welcome to the struggle. That was very painful, because I believe that I could get to that place in my life. Your grandmother did. It didn't happen. So we'd hope that this would be a place, it'd be a world where you could do it. But I'm glad that you're discovering your voice. And as a future librarian, you're going to make sure that students of color have works that affirm them and build them up, particularly girls of color, women of color, that will really build them up, because you know that's very important. You had very little of that. And so, but using your voice to come in here today and not just, not come because the professor wasn't, is a huge, huge deal. And so I just want to commend you for that. But it's a greatly written article. And if you give me permission, I'm not gonna push you on this. But if you say it's okay, I'll even publish the article, your response to the professor, the letter you wrote. Because I think in the book in the passage that people read, it was about the author was saying how they felt invisible. And in your letter, you said, I felt like that character. I felt invisible in that class. And if that's too personal, I won't put it up there. But you wrote a letter to that professor. But I just want to say this in closing. So Dr. Reese, thank you for being here with us. Your perspective was so helpful and so salient. But we always talk about Black students of color who can't function in places like the University of Wisconsin-Madison because maybe they were ill prepared or their parents didn't go to college. Your mom and dad went to college, that college. Your grandma went to college, that college. You got, our family has 13 degrees from Wisconsin. You belong there. You fit in there. Your last semester, you crushed it. You had a 4.0. You graduated the dean's list. I mean, so people talk about folks like you, like you're only struggling on campus. They don't talk about the qualified students who are wrestling with this while you're also applying to grad school. You're trying to find money for grad school. You're writing applications for grad school while you're still doing this. I want our listeners to understand Black students don't struggle on campuses just because of the lack of Black students. They struggle at the hands of white faculty and administrators who don't use their positions of power and influence to make that campus better. Stop putting that pressure on your roommates to make campus cool. There's responsibility of faculty to make that environment something that's worthy of the Wisconsin ideal, to make that a place where all people can really thrive. And this was a true failure on behalf of that department, and they're going to hear about it. So, thank you all. This has been a powerful and gut-wrenching and heart-wrenching discussion, but I'm proud of my daughter, and I'm proud of her ability to use her voice and her mind to stand up against racism, whether it's subtle or not so subtle. I'm really proud of that. So listen, you're going to want to share this episode. Send it out to your friends who are faculty, who are teachers. Just understand a lot. Education is the vehicle by which African-American people have really experienced upward mobility. If that becomes tainted and we are trapped in the web of insensitivity and racism, it holds us down. So anyone you know and love who works in any aspect, any educational sphere, share this episode with them. This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex Gee. Thank you for being part of our family. And as always, subscribe, listen, enjoy, learn, and share. I want to thank Corey Saffold and Marcus Fleming for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, my engineer, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and our intro and outro are recorded by Cynthia Woodland. And a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex Gee's amazing work at www.alexgee.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.